Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. This is a talk video and it is the beginning of April, so it's time for our latest quarterly speculation video. We do these every 3 months where we look at what just happened in Star Wars Lucasfilm and look forward to what's about to happen in Star Wars Lucasfilm. Try and draw some educated guesses for where Galaxy of Heroes could be going so that we can better prepare our rosters in advance. We're going to look at that calendar for what's about to happen. We are going to look back at some of the recent videos for some of our predictions that have been wins, and then we're going to make some character predictions for this quarter, and along with that, look at what could be the next Conquest character, what Omicrons could be happening to some older characters, and what kind of advanced preparation we can be doing for some of the existing characters to get ourselves ready, and then we'll wrap up with the free-to-play gearing of my roster. Now, as always, we are going to look at both the Marvel and Lucasfilm schedules because Disney tends to stagger the release dates on these so that we're not getting pulled as an audience into too many different directions. So the empty slots within the schedule are where some shows without release dates like Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew are probably going to fall. And right now we can already see that from August through the end of the year, it's fairly empty, particularly August, September, and in December, where only in that October through early November range is there a couple movies scheduled with Kraven and Captain Marvel 2, the Marvels. Now there's a few things that are still on the schedule with X-Men 97, Loki, and What If that we don't know where they're going to fall. They could fall earlier or later. Star Wars, probably we can expect the Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew stuff. Maybe Skeleton Crew a little earlier. I think that wrapped sooner, and Ahsoka maybe a little later to end the year, since I think they just wrapped, if they have at all. I think that's what we've been saying. The other show that was announced for 2023, Acolyte, has been pushed to 2024, so we don't need to consider that one anymore for how it's going to affect anything here. Now, I expect things to be a lot clearer after the Star Wars Celebration. We'll probably have an idea of when Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew will be happening, but that means right now, in terms of what's happening this quarter, we are going to basically just get the end of Mando Season 2. Fallen Order was delayed until this quarter from last quarter, and we have Star Wars Celebration to look forward to, which could have an impact along with the May the 4th festivities. So really it's just Fallen Order and Mando Season 3 wrap-up that is going to be happening. And then what happened last quarter was basically the entirety of Bad Batch Season 2 and the bulk of Mando. And the previous quarters that we haven't really seen Lucasfilm or SWGOH and Galaxy of Heroes really address too much content has been this Andor, Tales of the Jedi, and even Kenobi range of content. There's still a lot of room for CG to address tie-ins to that, particularly Kenobi, because it's been longer. CG typically needs kind of a 6-month range to release characters from a new show, unless they had some coordination with Lucasfilm in advance, which usually isn't happening. So in terms of this quarter, I don't know how many surprises we're really going to see. We have the 3 remaining Fallen Order characters and the Cal Kestis Hero's Journey event. That leaves at most room for 2 Marquees, but more likely 1 additional Marquee beyond what we already know, particularly if we look back at last year where they wrapped up the Inquisitor releases. They just had Sortie before starting some of the Jabba releases. I kind of feel like we're going to see something that is reminiscent to what we saw a year ago. We also are going to have the Crate Dragon and Raid system overhaul. That's all going to be happening. We're going to need to keep that in mind. We'll talk about that more later in the video. For this quarter's wins, now Kel, we knew was coming in advance because of the leaks, but I'm awarding myself partial credit on this one for the timing of the release. That was the piece that was unknown. Not that it was hard to predict, but that's not what this exercise is about. It's about arbitrary accolades over meaningless predictions. But who we have spent a lot of time talking about on this channel is Saw Gerrera and Tusken Warrior. So much time that, in fact, in the last video, I even pulled back a little bit, thinking that this past quarter, they would be less likely to arrive because they didn't make as much sense with the Lucasfilm schedule. I thought it might actually make some sense to wait a little bit longer since the window of opportunity to match up with some of these shows had been lapsed. But we've been anticipating these characters for months, so I'm going to be placing this in the win column. Now, what we started doing in one of the more recent iterations of this series is we started to call out a couple characters worth working on if they were ignored in your roster, who could be primed for renewed viability during the quarter, and Scion of Django was one of those I keyed in on as one of those candidates. That due to either touch-ups, new characters, or Omicrons, could see some new utility within the game, and Scion of Django saw that with the addition of Chieftain and his Omicron, elevating him to some 3v3 usage. In K2SO, this one's a little bit more of a partial credit situation, because with K2SO we did call him out, but what we saw with him to gain that new utility was a Datacron, and that is a temporary boost that is less in the spirit of the exercise, but still saw him get some use, so that was a little bit of a win. For this quarter, we need to consider the totality of the kinds of releases that we could be seeing. There are several marquee characters coming. There could be more on top of that. We are getting the raid overhaul, which could and probably will include a raid character, but doesn't necessarily have to, and a Conquest character is to come. There could also be, on top of all this, a Galactic Chase event. Now, with the marquee releases, what we know is we are getting Marin, Saw Gerrera, and Tarful this quarter. Now, on top of all that, we could get maybe one or two more marquees, but in all likelihood, I think we're at most going to get one marquee release. There's been a lot of strong speculation within the community that the next Galactic Legend could be Endor Leia, and that's probably going to coincide sometime around May the 4th. That makes a lot of sense because of the anniversary of Return of the Jedi. But when we look back at last year's announcement for Jabba and the previous year's announcement for Lord Vader, those both came in July. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen again, but I'm a little bit more comfortable betting that the next Geo will be announced in July than in this quarter. What I do think is more likely to happen is Endor Leia will be announced as a marquee release around that time period, because I think she makes a lot more sense as a marquee character than as a Galactic Legend. Instead, what I think her release will be is leading up to the eventual announcement of the next Galactic Legend, General Leia, who I think makes more sense as a Galactic Legend and meets the status that CG has set forth for a lot of these other characters. Now, on top of an Endor Leia marquee release, I think there's a couple other characters that are some strong candidates for entering the game this quarter in one fashion or another. The Scout Trooper, just like with Endor Leia, would tie into the Return of the Jedi anniversary, and they are one of the most desired characters yet to enter the game. And this might be the perfect time to capitalize on this opportunity. But in addition to the marquee releases, who those two I think are some of the best candidates, I think Cobb Vanth. This may now be the perfect time to bring Cobb Vanth into the game as the raid reward character. The previous raid releases were related to the raid in some fashion, and this Krayt Dragon raid relating to Tatooine with Tusken synergy and other synergies. Cobb Vanth makes probably the most sense, or among the characters that make the most sense, as that raid reward. And I think he would be a character that would be received very well by the community. Now, in terms of the next Conquest release, CG may have spoiled that themselves. This screenshot here is from Reddit from when CG had released the monthly calendar. They had originally included this line, which is no longer there, which refers to the Fury class interceptor. Now, that could be a chase release ship. I think it is probably going to be the Conquest release, only because the pilot of that ship is almost definitely going to be Melgus, and it doesn't make sense, at least to me, for a Conquest pilot to have a Galactic Chase ship, more likely going to have a Conquest release ship to be paired with him. The Fury class interceptor was used by Melgus in some cutscenes and in the Old Republic game, and Melgus was paired with the Fury class interceptor as part of the LEGO release. Now I think this is all going to lead up to Nihilus's Ravager as the next capital ship that will probably be announced in July. So this is a little early to be referring to this for the quarterly speculation videos, but I think it's something that we should all be thinking of because the pieces are now falling into place, and I think we need to be prepared for all of this, and we'll talk about that more in some of the predictions for the existing characters that we will be about to get to. But what we've seen with the Profundity and the Executor were those ships were announced in July in the State of the Galaxy or the Road Ahead, and the ship was released a month later, giving a short window for players to prepare for it between July and an August release, and then on a monthly cadence thereafter. We're going to transition into the next phase of this video, the characters who I think are candidates for an Omicron touch-up. Now, the past couple of months, what we saw was Pago and Droideka receive some territory war Omicrons, and if the rate holds, and I think CG may have slowed down a little bit on Omicron releases, but I expect that Cad Bane is an extremely strong candidate, and which is why he has been a repeat prediction for a little bit now, because what we've seen from CG is a lot of characters who are required for a Galactic Legend tend to get Omicrons. At least every Galactic Legend has one or two characters that has an Ami. Cad Bane, I think, makes a lot of sense as being a beloved character who doesn't have a ton of utility, so an Omicron would help boost that. Gamorrean Guard is a guild store farm, and those types of characters tend to get a little bit of an extra attention from CG, and for the same reason, Young Han is a candidate on this list, a character who's very overlooked in general from the community. The last two here, Veteran Smuggler Chewie and Clone Wars Chewie. Vet Chewie was here last month, and he remains on this, but I've added Clone Wars Chewie in place of Cody, who was in that final slot. Cody was there as a prediction tied into the last territory battle where Cody was a requirement for a node that was impossible unless you really went crazy with relics, which people didn't want to do. So it made a lot of sense for Cody to receive an Ami for that purpose. That window's closed. It doesn't make a lot of sense to go back and do it now. There was a very small window of opportunity for CG to still slide that one in. Clone Wars Chewie, though, with the addition of Tarful on the way, makes a lot of sense because the Wookiees in general are not very good. So placing an Omicron or even giving him a little bit of a touch-up may elevate him to some Tarful synergy that will make them usable for that Wookiee territory battle in the new Rise of the Empire TB. Which transitions us into the existing characters in the game who I think might be worthy of attention for preparing in advance. These are characters who might get a touch-up. A Marquee release might make them viable. This is where Scion of Django was last quarter, and that prediction paid off. Sith Assassin was here last quarter as well. Sith Assassin remains because of the Sith Fighter and potential synergy that we might see with the Sith fleet. Sith Empire Trooper is here because it is very possible that if the Fury class interceptor does get released, that it may be a two-pilot ship. That other pilot is almost definitely going to be the Sith Empire Trooper, who is currently not a pilot out of the Sith Empire characters and was released along with Melgus in the LEGO, and you can go back to that picture to see that. The other two here, when I think about the either ships or characters that are underlooked who could have some use, Bodhi, it's kind of ridiculous. He ties into Saw Gerrera a little bit. Now Saw could be a character who elevates Rogue One. He could help Rebels. There's a lot of different directions he could go. I'm kind of hoping, I've said this in several videos now, that I'm hoping CG creates two separate Saw Gerrera characters. One, a younger Saw that is the Fallen Order version, and then an older, more rugged Saw that is the Rogue One version. And that Rogue One version could be a Conquest release in the future, because Saw's profile as a character in Star Wars has just been growing since his introduction, to the point where I think it's very arguable that he deserves more than a Marquee release at this point. And if not this point, the next season in Andor is going to elevate him even further, where he may almost definitely deserve the status then. Kanan, and along with all that, Bodhi could tie into one of those Saw versions, and Bodhi would also makes a lot of sense as a pilot who we might see like a chase event that could help out Bodhi with like a Rogue One ship, because it's kind of weird that we don't have that ship in game. Kanan Jarrus here, just thinking about the Phoenix characters who could possibly tie into Ahsoka. Those Phoenix characters should be worked on for the profundity, at least the Ghost, to make it better, but we can also work in advance of Ahsoka, where I think we're going to see a lot more demand placed on the Phoenix squad because of how hard they are to gear and because so many players ignore them. It's a good opportunity for CG to force some spending in gearing. And now for our wrap up, the free-to-play gearing of my roster. We're going to do 2 weeks here because we're a little bit behind. I'd like to get caught up. So this is going to be January 22nd and January 31st. And this is going to be basically just after unlocking Jabba and just before unlocking Dr. Aphra. So you see here the state of my Palpatine and where the Dr. Aphra farms are. That's where we're going to pay attention to for this. You saw Jabba down there for a moment. Taking 000 and BT1 both up to 6 stars. Those farms were moving along fairly well, but you can still see we still have a decent amount of farming to go, with slightly under 100 shards to go on both, or actually even less than that, in the 50 to 75 range. This is right after unlocking Jabba, so taking him up to gear 11 and stopping there mainly because of testing purposes and just I think being low on Kairos. Pay attention to the Zetas there, because between Grand Inquisitor, Jabba, and Dr. Aphra and all the Marquee releases, I am under 100 Zetas for the first time in maybe years. So I need to replenish those. I'm actually going to go back to buying them with fleet currency for the first time in definitely years. Palpatine here, taking him up to Relic 6. That was to help out my Starkiller. Wasn't being consistent enough in countering Ray squads, and that's pretty important. Because Relic 6 was cheap enough, brought him higher. And that actually has made a pretty significant difference, countering Ray much more consistently now, without Palpatine dying early. Also making progress towards Sith Eternal Emperor with that Tarkin progress and Palpatine. Trooper here is just a little luxury thing for fun. Just a usable character who was at lower gear, so bringing him higher now that we have the gear update has made a lot of this stuff a lot cheaper and easier to handle. And this again is January 31st. You can see the status of Jabba, the progress made on Sana Staros, and the shard progress on BT1 and 000 just in 1 week here. We bring Jabba up to gear 12. I'm going to put on the left side pieces, but I partly because I like to see how characters will perform at gear 12, even GLs, and partly because I just don't have the Kairos for it, because I'm going to be throwing them on Iden here because I want to test out the TIE Defender at the max ability levels. And Iden requires 2 Kairos at gear 10. So going to my squad screen here, just so you can see the progress there on those Aphra requirements. Pause if you want to see that in detail, but that's 1 week of progress, going from 3 to 5 stars on Sana. That's what a cheap node will do for you. Do those quick refreshes, and BT1 000. You can see BT1 has caught up with 000, even though those were both farmed in the same way on the same day. So that averaging out and that kind of correcting over that past week, which is a little interesting, because there's like a 20 shard difference, I think, between the weeks. Now, TIE Defender here, bringing this one up. I did fully farm this during the chase event. This was in the middle of the chase event, though, so this is only up to 6 stars. We did finish it off. I forgot for several months to star up that final star, though. Just noticed it a few weeks ago. Because the ship's actually pretty excellent. Even at that 6 stars, Gear 11 pilot, it's been great. Definitely worthy of higher investment, but it's going to do a lot for you even at this level. I've been very impressed with it. Only issue has been even getting it out, because with the lineup I've been using with the Scythe, sometimes we just don't get an open slot to bring in a reinforcement. I know there's other lineups that I could use instead, though. So take a look at the progress on Sith Eternal Emperor. Just making incremental progress. I'm still short on resources even to this point, which is 2 months later. I don't really have the resources on these characters because of after going after Jabba and Dr. Aphra and Grand Inquisitor, I was tapped out. I'm just now kind of getting close to probably being able to unlock Sith Eternal Emperor by May if I really want to. I'm still figuring out what pace and rate I want to do these things on, just because I like being the underdog in Grand Arena. But at the same time, as players unlock Jabba and Dr. Aphra, it will become the competition is going to become difficult enough where I probably do need a 4th GL at this point. I pushed 2 GLs far longer than I should have. Just adding one of the Kairos on BT1, just so psychologically it's a little bit easier to deal with. You can see there, Sanastaros, the progress. And that's where we call it for those 2 weeks. And we will wrap it up there. Hopefully we don't have to wait too much longer for seeing the next of the Cal Kestis journey characters. CG can be a little unpredictable with these things. We saw the Inquisitors last year, a couple of them come out in that quick cadence like Cal Kestis and Ser Junda did, but then I think between like 9th Sister and 8th Brother, there was a month or more between them. So we don't really know when we can expect Merrin, Saw, and Tarful. Just that over the next 2 months, we probably will see them in maybe like a 2 to 3 week cadence is what I'm hoping for, which will leave the month of June where we might see 1 additional Marquee being from those predictions. But thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone. Be excellent to each other. This is still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.